Well, why won't the international community investigate the bombing of the Nord Stream pipeline, the largest ecological disaster, the largest ecological attack in world history? Seems like a good idea, maybe to get some answers on that. They don't seem to really care about that. Tucker Carlson asked that question to presidential candidate Nikki Haley over the weekend, and she didn't have any kind of answer. Watch.
Well, speaking of energy in the military, who blew up the Nord Stream pipeline?
I mean, I don't know.
I'm not claiming you did it. No. I'm just kidding. No, I don't know. I mean,
that's what I'm saying. Do you know who did it?
Seems pretty obvious. It was backed by the Biden administration, I would say. I mean, I think all the evidence suggests that, but I wasn't there. I guess what I'm really saying is if you were running against the Biden administration, to do something like that and shaft our closest allies in the world, which would be Western Europe, and deprive them of the energy they need to run their manufacturing sector and destroy their economy, which it is in the process of doing, like, that's a major sin to have done something like that. You just betrayed our allies, and no one on the right is accusing the Bidens of what they clearly did. So I don't know why.
My next guest, though, is asking that question. Jeffrey Brodsky is a journalist who just testified before the United Nations. Watch.
Thank you very much. My name is Jeffrey Brodsky. I'm the only journalist to travel to all 4 blast sites of the Nord Stream 1 and 2 pipelines on the Baltic Sea. I've been investigating the Nord Stream sabotage since the day it occurred on September 26, 2022. I appear before the United Nations Security Council on my own behalf. I represent no government or organization in the testimony that I will deliver. The attack of the Nord Stream pipelines is likely the most severe act of eco-terrorism and the largest instance of industrial sabotage in history.
And Jeffrey joins us now to talk about his investigation and looking into the Nord Stream pipeline. Jeffrey, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Clayton. Pleasure to be here.
So why did you start investigating this?
Well, when this took place on September 26, 2022, when the sabotage occurred, I was just fascinated by it. And I was a little bit taken aback, frankly, that it didn't seem like the mainstream media in particular was interested in asking any hard questions or really investigating the sabotage. So I read as much about it as I possibly could. I talked to some politicians, mainly European politicians. I talked to some experts, researchers and scholars, and I learned as much about the sabotage as I possibly could. And then when I felt that I had enough knowledge, I started contacting some editors of magazines and newspapers, and they were interested in what I was saying. And then I started really investigating even more deeply and more thoroughly into what happened, into the sabotage.
To dive even more deeply into this, you testified before the United Nations, bringing to their attention some things that you found. You're the only journalist, to my knowledge, that's gone to all 4 of the different sites. What did you find? First of all, how did you locate these sites, and what did you find when you got there?
Okay, so I think I am the only journalist to go to all 4 blast sites. They're not difficult to locate. Anyone can, geo coordinates, longitude, latitude, they can be located quite easily. We had a sonar device on our boat, and we chartered a boat, and the captain and his first mate were very knowledgeable. These people they do a lot of expeditions on the Baltic Sea, and it was quite easy for them to locate all four of the blast sites. As to what we found, we found what was most significant that we found was the purpose of our expedition was really 3 things. We wanted to, 1, determine the amount of explosives used at each blast site in the attack. We wanted in kilograms. We wanted to figure out where the explosives were placed, where the bombs were placed. Were they placed on the pipeline, under the pipeline, next to the pipeline? And we wanted to figure out what type of charges were used. Were these linear shaped charges? Were these bulk explosives? Were these canonical charges? And we were able to do that by capturing underwater drone images and videos that had never been seen by the public before of all 4 blast sites. And we were able to do that by also capturing sonar images of offshore blast sites. I then took this data that was obtained through the expedition, and I showed it to explosive experts, ex-US Navy SEALs, the managing director of an explosive engineering company. And for the first time, they were able to calculate accurately the amount of explosives used in the attack at all four of the blast sites, for example. That was really significant because before it had been reported previously, and erroneously, I should say, that it was up to, for example, about 500 kilograms of explosives used at each site, or even more. But those calculations were inaccurate, and they were just far overestimated. These experts that I talked to and have quoted in my articles, they've said that it's between 10 and 50 kilograms per blast site.
Why is that significant? Can you educate us?
Yeah, why is that significant? Well, it's significant because, knowing the amount of explosives used is one of the clues to how the operation was carried out, how it could have been carried out, what was used to carry out the operation.
Perhaps the size of the boat.
Size of the boat, certainly. Whether or not divers went, whether or not a submarine would have been needed, perhaps what kind of UUV would have been required, and that would indicate that a smaller boat could have been possibly used, and it also indicates that divers were likely used. A submarine was probably not involved, or it may have been, but a diver could have done this certainly without the assistance of a submarine, according to the experts I've spoken to. So that was all significant. Those were significant findings and clues that could really lead to, hopefully at some point unmasking a perpetrator.
So fewer than 500 kilograms of explosive used at these 4 different blast sites.
Vastly fewer. 10 to 50, and 50 would be the very high range. Most of the experts I've spoken to said it's, closer to the 50 figure than the 10 figure.
So what was the United Nations response when you presented this data to them?
Well, the United Nations response was, unfortunately, what its response has been, since this took place, approximately 8 months ago. It seems that all the countries on the Security Councils kind of fell back to their previous positions, which is that there is saying that there is an ongoing investigation. I should say there are 3 ongoing investigations they be conducted by Sweden, Germany, and Denmark, separate investigations. And they keep saying, well, we should just wait for these results. But, it's very unlikely, at least according to the experts I've spoken to, and at least what we know about, underwater surveillance systems, that these countries, at least Sweden in particular, doesn't know what happened, and the U.S. doesn't know what happened. And it seems to me that these countries are dragging their feet. And, when $26 billion of critical infrastructure is blown up, infrastructure that was critical to the European economy, particularly the German economy, which is often called the motor of the European Union, is sabotaged, it seems to me that the public has a right to know who did this and how it happened. And it's in the public interest to know. And I'm not really sure why there isn't consensus in the UN Security Council about this.
What surprised you the most, apart from this, maybe the size of the explosives? Was there anything that stood out to you that maybe contradicted some of the reporting we've seen from Seymour Hersh and others that point fingers specifically at the United Nations?
I'm not sure if Seymour Hersh's reporting has been outright contradicted, but he did mention in an interview, maybe 2 interviews, I'm not really sure, that there was probably 2 bombs used on each pipeline. It looks like there was just 1 bomb used on each pipeline, and it looks like, but on the other hand, there are some things in his reporting that seem to be corroborated. That there were probably divers used.
And do we know from whom, which country, who was involved? I mean, again, what Seymour Hersh has said is one thing, and there now seems to be the United States and the mainstream media in the United States is trying to push the blame off on some rogue Ukrainians within Ukrainian security service that no longer alive. So it's an easy scapegoat. What does your research show you about that? Able to confirm or deny any of that?
It's not able to confirm or deny any of that, but there's some open source research that can, that indicates that the United States and its allies, particularly the United States and Sweden, know exactly who did this.